Imagine this. Your mother goes home after dinner with family. You drop her off yourself. You watch her walk toward her front door. You drive away. And that is the last time you ever see her. That is the reality Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognized faces on American television, has been living with since January 31st, 2026. Her mother, Nancy Guthrie, a 65-year-old grandmother, was taken from her own home in Tucson, Arizona, not from a parking lot, not from a hiking trail, from her front door in the middle of the night. And what investigators found the next morning changed everything. Blood on the porch, her doorbell camera physically ripped off the wall, and a pacemaker, the medical device keeping her heart beating that stopped transmitting signals at exactly 2:28 in the morning. This is not a cold case. This is not ancient history. This happened weeks ago. The investigation is active. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. And today we are going to go through every single verified fact in this case, the evidence, the ransom notes, the DNA, the FBI's search across the border into Mexico, and we are going to do it with the respect this story deserves, because behind every headline, behind every breaking news alert, there is a real woman, a mother, a grandmother, someone whose daughter goes on national television every single morning and has to pretend the world is normal while her own world has been shattered. Stay with me, because this story goes deeper than any headline has told you. WHO is Nancy Guthrie. Before we get into the evidence, you need to know who Nancy Guthrie is, not as a headline, as a person. Nancy Guthrie is 65 years old. She is a mother of two daughters, Savannah and Annie. She spent her life being the kind of parent who showed up, holidays, dinners, milestones. She was present. She lived alone in a residential neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona, a city of nearly 1 million people, nestled in the Sonoran Desert. Her home was modest, quiet, the kind of neighborhood where people wave to each other from driveways, the kind of place where nothing like this is supposed to happen. Her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, you almost certainly know. She has been a co-host of NBC's Today Show for over a decade. She is a lawyer, a journalist, and one of the most visible faces in American morning television. She lives in New York with her husband and children. Her other daughter, Annie Guthrie, lives in Tucson, the same city. As Nancy, close, regular contact, family dinners. That closeness is important because on the night of January 31st, 2026, it was Annie's household that Nancy had spent the evening with. Nancy had a pacemaker. This detail matters enormously, and we will come back to it. Her heart required a device to regulate its rhythm. That device transmitted signals, and those signals suddenly went silent in the early hours of February 1st. But first, let's go back to the evening of January 31st, because the night started completely normally. Think about that for a second. A normal evening with family, dinner, conversation, the ordinary rhythm of a life well lived, and then nothing. Comment below right now before we go any further. Had you heard about this case before you clicked on this video? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I want to know how far this story has actually reached. The night of January 31st. Let's walk through the night of January 31st, 2026, minute by minute as far as the verified evidence allows. Nancy Guthrie spent the evening with family. At some point that evening, she was dropped off at her Tucson home by her son-in-law. He watched her head toward her front door. He drove away. That moment, that ordinary, unremarkable goodbye was the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie by someone who knew her. Now here is where the verified evidence takes over from the normal evening. At some point during the night, her doorbell camera captured something, a figure, masked, standing at her front door. This was not a neighbor checking in. This was not a delivery. This was someone wearing a mask at her front door in the middle of the night. The footage shows the intruder attempting to disable the doorbell camera. They knew it was there. They had a plan for it, and eventually they succeeded, because when Nancy's family arrived the next morning, the camera had not simply been disconnected. It had been physically removed from the wall. Think about what that tells us. Whoever this was, they were not panicking. They were not rushing. They took the time to physically pull that camera off the wall. That is a deliberate act. That is someone removing evidence. And then there is the pacemaker. At 2:28 in the morning, in the early hours of February 1st, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped transmitting signals. Pacemakers are connected to monitoring systems. They send data, they communicate. When that signal goes silent, it means one of two things. Either the device malfunctioned, or something happened to the person wearing it. Investigators treated the 2:28 a.m. timestamp as a critical data point. It gave them something incredibly precise, a moment in time when something significant occurred. Let that sink in for a moment. 2:28 a.m. The pacemaker goes silent. The camera is torn off the wall, and Nancy Guthrie is gone. This is the moment this became a crime scene. Pause the video right now if you need to, because I want you to feel the weight of that. A woman's medical device, the thing keeping her alive, went silent at 2:28 in the morning, and no one knew until the sun came up. Comment below, what was your reaction when you first heard about the pacemaker evidence? Because for a lot of people, that detail changes how this case feels entirely. Let me know. The discovery on February 1st, 2026, the morning after Nancy was last seen, her family came to check on her. What they found on that front porch stopped them cold. Blood, not inside the house, on the porch, where she would have been standing when she arrived home, where she would have faced whoever was waiting for her. The doorbell camera gone, ripped from the wall. The mounting bracket still in place, the camera itself missing, and Nancy nowhere. The Pima County Sheriff's Department was called. Within hours, investigators had declared it a crime scene. Their conclusion was direct and unambiguous. Nancy Guthrie had been taken against her will. This was not a voluntary disappearance. This was not a confused elderly woman who wandered off. This was an abduction from her own front porch in the night. 2 days later, on February 3rd, 2026, the FBI formally joined the investigation. A federal kidnapping task force was activated. When the FBI steps into a missing persons case at that speed, it signals two things. First, they believe the crime crosses jurisdictional lines, meaning this may not have stayed within Tucson or even within Arizona. Second, they have resources and intelligence capabilities that local law enforcement does not. The case was no longer just a local matter. It was now a federal investigation. And then the FBI did something that put this case in front of every American who watches the news. They released the doorbell camera footage. The footage showed the masked intruder at Nancy's front door. The figure was deliberate, calm, methodical, not the frantic energy of someone acting impulsively. This was someone who came to that door with a plan. And investigators noticed something else in the footage, something that pointed toward premeditation at a level that should disturb every person watching this video. The images suggested this intruder may have visited Nancy's home before, prior to the night of January 31st, possibly more than once, possibly to study the layout, to understand the camera angles, to confirm the schedule. This was not random. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie chose her, specifically, deliberately, and they prepared. How does that make you feel knowing this was planned? Drop your reaction in the comments. I read every single one. Now let's talk about what the physical evidence revealed, because this is where the investigation gets both promising and complicated. Near Nancy's home, investigators recovered gloves, the kind worn to avoid leaving fingerprints. Standard procedure for someone who has thought about forensics, but gloves are not perfect, and this pair was not an exception. DNA testing of those gloves identified a biological profile, a male, unknown, not in the FBI's national DNA database, which means no prior criminal record in the federal system or a record under a different sample. This is significant for two reasons. First, it tells investigators the person is male. Second, it tells them this individual has either never been arrested and processed in the federal system or has deliberately avoided creating a searchable record. But here is where it gets more complicated. Inside Nancy's home, investigators found additional DNA, mixed samples meaning DNA from more than one person, combined in a way that makes individual profiles harder to isolate and confirm. Mixed DNA is one of the most challenging forms of forensic evidence to process. It requires advanced analysis, time, and in some cases may never yield a clean result. So what do investigators do when conventional DNA analysis hits its limits? They turn to forensic genetic genealogy. If you are not familiar with this technique, let me explain it because it is genuinely remarkable and it has solved cases that were considered unsolvable. Forensic genetic genealogy takes an unknown DNA profile and runs it through genealogical databases, the kind of databases built from consumer ancestry tests that millions of Americans have taken voluntarily. By finding distant relatives of the unknown profile, investigators can build a family tree and work forward in time until they identify a living person who could be the source of the DNA. This technique has identified killers who evaded justice for decades. It cracked the Golden State Killer case. It has a track record, and investigators in the Nancy Guthrie case are using it now. This means that even if the unknown male DNA profile is not in the FBI's criminal database, even if this person has never been arrested, they may still be identified through a distant cousin who took an ancestry DNA test years ago without knowing it would one day matter. The science is working. The question is time. Here is your interaction moment. The DNA was found on gloves near the scene, but it belongs to someone not in the federal database. Forensic genetic genealogy is now being used to identify them. Drop a comment. Did you know this technology existed before today? And do you think it will crack this case? I genuinely want to know what you think. The ransom. Now we get to the part of this case that turned a missing persons investigation into something even more urgent, the ransom notes. Multiple media outlets, including TMZ, received communications demanding payment for Nancy Guthrie's release. The currency demanded was Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, untraceable if handled correctly, the preferred payment method of people who understand that cash leaves trails. The Guthrie family responded publicly, Savannah Guthrie, and her family stated they were willing to pay. They made clear that getting Nancy back was the only priority. The money did not matter. Read that again. One of the most public families in America stood up and said, "Take the money, just bring her home." Now here is the critical detail that investigators have been careful about. The authenticity of those ransom notes has not been publicly confirmed. The FBI has not officially verified that the communications came from whoever actually has Nancy. In kidnapping cases, it is not uncommon for opportunistic individuals, people with no connection to the crime, to send fake ransom demands hoping to extort money from a desperate family. Investigators have to treat every communication seriously while simultaneously working to verify its authenticity. That process takes time, and every hour of that verification process is an hour Nancy Guthrie has been missing. But then one of the ransom communications contained a specific claim, a geographic claim. The note stated that Nancy Guthrie was being held in Mexico, and the FBI took that seriously enough to act on it. The investigation expanded across the international border. FBI resources were directed toward Mexico, coordinating with Mexican law enforcement, activating cross-border intelligence channels, conducting searches in areas referenced or implied by the communications. Think about what a cross-border abduction means for the investigation. Different jurisdiction, different law enforcement systems, different terrain. The complexity multiplies immediately. Resources that might resolve a domestic case quickly become stretched across an international operation. And yet the FBI expanded, because when there is a credible claim that an American citizen is being held across an international border, you do not wait, you move. This is where I need you to stop and really feel the weight of this moment. Savannah Guthrie, a woman who goes on national television every morning, told the world publicly that her family would pay. That is a mother's desperation translated into public action. That is a daughter doing the only thing she could think of to reach whoever has her mother. Comment below. If you were in Savannah Guthrie's position, a public figure, your mother missing, a ransom demand on the table, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. On top of cooperating with the FBI investigation and stating their willingness to pay the ransom, the Guthrie family did something else. They put up money, publicly, specifically. Savannah Guthrie announced a $1 million family reward, $1 million for information leading directly to Nancy's safe recovery. That announcement was not made quietly through a lawyer. It was made publicly, deliberately, because the family understood something that investigators have long known. Sometimes the person who breaks a case open is not a detective. It is someone on the periphery who knows something or saw something and needed a reason to come forward. $1 million is a reason, but the Guthrie family was not alone. The FBI added to the reward fund. Tucson Crime Stoppers contributed. When the totals were combined, the reward for information in the Nancy Guthrie case exceeded $1.2 million. $1.2 million for information, not for solving the case, not for making an arrest, just for information that leads to her safe recovery. That number tells you something about the urgency, about the desperation, about what this family and these investigators are willing to do to bring Nancy Guthrie home. And then the Guthrie family said something in public that took extraordinary courage to say. They acknowledged the possibility that Nancy may no longer be alive. They said it out loud. They faced it. And they said that even so they needed answers. They needed to find her. They needed closure, whatever form that took. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because that is not a statement made by people who have given up. That is a statement made by people who love someone so much they are willing to face the worst possibility while still fighting for the best one. That is what grief looks like when it refuses to stop moving forward. Drop a comment right now. What does it feel like to hear that the family is still fighting, still offering rewards, still pleading publicly weeks after she disappeared? What do you feel when you hear that? Let's talk about who investigators believe they are looking for. Based on the doorbell footage, the physical evidence, and the behavior patterns observed at the scene, law enforcement experts have developed an initial profile of the intruder. The assessment is that this person appears to be an inexperienced criminal. Now, before you take a breath of relief at that word inexperienced, I need to explain why that assessment actually makes this situation more dangerous, not less. Experienced criminals operate with a kind of cold logic. They have a plan, they follow it. They make calculated decisions based on what serves their goal, which, in a kidnapping for ransom, is getting paid and releasing the victim. Inexperienced criminals do not operate that way. They improvise, they panic. When things do not go according to plan, they make unpredictable decisions, and unpredictable decisions in a hostage situation are the most dangerous kind. An experienced kidnapper with a ransom goal has an incentive to keep the victim alive and negotiate. An inexperienced one, under pressure, scared, things not going the way they imagined, that person becomes genuinely unpredictable. Law enforcement experts who spoke publicly about this case used the word dangerous specifically in relation to the inexperience assessment, not because incompetent criminals are less threatening, but because they are harder to predict, and in a situation where a 65-year-old woman with a pacemaker is in their custody, unpredictability is the worst possible variable. This is also why the FBI has been careful about how they manage public communications around this case. Too much pressure on an unpredictable suspect can trigger exactly the wrong response. Nancy Guthrie's medical needs make time a critical factor. A pacemaker requires monitoring. It requires medical attention over time. The longer this goes on, the more urgent the medical dimension becomes. Comment below. Knowing all of this about the suspect profile, does it change how you feel about the likelihood of Nancy being found safely? Be honest. This is the space for real conversation. Why Nancy Guthrie? Why this family? Investigators and analysts have pointed to what they believe is the most likely motive, and it connects directly to Savannah Guthrie's public profile. Savannah Guthrie is one of the highest paid anchors in American morning television. Her financial profile, her salary, her estimated net worth has been reported publicly by multiple outlets over the years. That information is searchable, accessible, known. The theory investigators are working with is that whoever targeted Nancy Guthrie did so specifically because of who her daughter is. They calculated that Savannah Guthrie had the financial means to meet a significant ransom demand. They identified Nancy as the most accessible and vulnerable member of that family living alone in Tucson, away from the security and visibility that surrounds Savannah in New York, and they acted on that calculation. This is a pattern that has appeared in kidnapping cases involving wealthy or famous families across history. The target is rarely the public figure themselves. The target is someone close to them, someone who can be used as leverage, someone whose safety the wealthy or famous person will do almost anything to secure. Nancy Guthrie was chosen because she was loved, because her daughter is visible, because someone looked at this family and saw an opportunity. That is one of the most painful realities of this entire case. Nancy's vulnerability came from being loved by someone the world knows. As of the time of this video, the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is active on multiple fronts simultaneously. Forensic genealogy testing is underway on the unknown male DNA profile recovered from the gloves found near the scene. The FBI's cross-border investigation into Mexico is ongoing, following the ransom. Communication that claimed Nancy was being held there. Communications received by media outlets are being analyzed for authenticity and origin. The total reward for information stands at over $1.2 million. Nancy Guthrie has a pacemaker. Time matters, every single day matters. If you are watching this video and you know anything at all about where Nancy Guthrie is, who took her, or who sent those ransom communications, I am asking you directly, do not put it in a comment, do not post it on social media, contact the FBI immediately. The tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can also submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. Your information could be the piece that brings her home. And if this video gave you something, if it helped you understand this case more deeply, if it helped you feel the reality of what this family is going through, please share it. Not for the views, because the more people who know Nancy Guthrie's face and her story, the harder it becomes for whoever has her to hide. Subscribe if you want to follow this case as it develops. I will update this community the moment verified new information becomes public. No speculation, no rumors, only confirmed facts. Nancy Guthrie, still missing, still someone's mother, still worth fighting for. If you know something, call 1-800-CALL-FBI.